First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's a beautiful hot bank holiday weekend. You could have chosen to do all sorts of things, and you've chosen to come and listen to me talk. So it's a great honour for me. Thank you very much. My name's Billy Hurley Reading. I'm a buildings historian, architectural historian, author, inspector of historic buildings, Hackney resident. And I have foolishly agreed to try and present all faith buildings in the borough of Hackney in 50 minutes. We've got a lot to get through. While this is happening, I'm going to share a secret with you all, which is that I absolutely hate public speaking, but I'm very enthusiastic about the subject. So with my enthusiasm and your goodwill, we're going to get through it. And we've also got Jake here to help. So this is great news. Okay, that's better. That's good. Let's start. Have I started my timer off? No. Okay. So start with the parameters. What are faith buildings? What are buildings? What do we mean by Hackney? These are important things if we're going to present this subject. What I've chosen to illustrate this slide is a picture of the Holywell Priory. This is a 12th century foundation priory. It was dissolved in the 1530s. There are fragments of it remaining, as you can probably just about see in the pictures. I'd say that's probably not a building because it's an archaeological remain. It's underground, it's underneath something else. And certainly the priory would not have recognised themselves as part of Hackney. This is right down by the city fringes. It's in Shoreditch, and this would have been in the day considered sort of 3 or 4 miles away from the village of Hackney. But the modern borough of Hackney does encompass all of Shoreditch. So what I've tried to do is include buildings. I haven't done lost buildings, that's a whole other talk. Included buildings that you can go and see today, and I've covered the entire borough, or tried to. Why am I doing this? I wrote this book, which came out last year, about the city churches, and I had to find a way, there's 48 of those, I had to find a way to construct a straightforward narrative that grouped these buildings into some sort of sensible organisational structure. The way I decided to do that was by talking about their atmosphere, because I think that's actually what that's how most people experience historic buildings. And also they're all multi-phase buildings. They're of many different decades and times. So it's really hard to say this is a building of the 1630s, this one is of the 1820s, when they've been altered and changed and reinvented. And our faith buildings have a great story and a great tradition of being reinvented over time. Because faith is such a personal thing, and what we want our buildings to do is to reflect that, and that's a process that is in continual change. So I grouped my 48 buildings in these 4 categories. I linked those to the seasons of the year, which link to the sort of liturgical cycle of the way religious buildings are used. You can see the categories that I put them down in. I was asked to come and do something for the History Festival in Hackney, and I thought, oh great, I'll just use the same structure. Doesn't work. Not at all. Absolute chaos. So, welcome to Hackney. I've already rebranded my own talk. Sorry, yeah, I can go back. You can take a picture of that. I mean, you can buy the book, Anthony. It's available in all good bookshops. Got your picture? Great. Welcome to Hackney. I've already rebranded my own talk. I think talking about buildings separately and individually in the borough here wasn't terribly helpful. So I think actually a better way to describe it is to talk about faith spaces in this borough. We have, over 1,000 years of history, we've used buildings and spaces in really different ways. I've excluded lost buildings, as I've already said, that's another talk. And I've also tried to exclude faith-adjacent uses, because I realised if I tried to include every vicarage, every Sunday school, I mean, across the road, Independent Place used to be a Bible factory. Is that a faith building? Yes, it probably is. I'm going to say it's faith adjacent and not cover it, because otherwise I would have gone absolutely mad trying to put all these buildings together. So buildings that were built for faith now converted, they're in if they're still standing. Buildings not built for faith but now in faith use, really interesting theme. Buildings not built for faith, used for faith, and now no longer in faith use. They're all in. So I'm using the same structure loosely. We're going to start with the most ancient and medieval buildings. This brings us right the way through to the Tudor period in the beginning, through the Stuarts and to the beginning of the Georgian period. This is quite straightforward. We've only really got 2 buildings in this category, whereas in the city there were hundreds of them. So we've got St Mary's Old Church. The records show that that's been there since at least 1314, probably quite a lot longer, and the Tower of St Augustine's in Hackney, at least 1275. The fabric of those buildings is not from those dates. They've been rebuilt over time, but they are the sites of, the locations of the historic parish churches. There was a third. Modern Hackney's made up of 3 ancient sort of parishes. The third is Shoreditch, but they demolished their medieval church and rebuilt it, and we will come to that in due course. The next thing I want to talk about, going really quickly because there's so much to cover, is even right back in this period, we're talking about faith in private houses. Hackney has, for a very long time, we have a great tradition of faith dialogue and diversity. This was quite a wealthy place in the Tudor period, so we're talking about dissent and reform, but we're talking about the sort of high end of that, the movers and shakers, the influential people across that sort of narrative of dissent. And often these are conversations, meetings that are happening in private houses. You'll recognise, I hope my pictures are okay, you'll recognise Sutton House, the only one that's still standing. I've already broken my first rule and included 2 lost buildings there. It's the Manor of Dalston, which was on Dalston Lane at the top, and the bottom one is Priestley's house from Clapton. But they're there to illustrate the fact that private houses are faith spaces in this period. Another really important place, and this is why I couldn't use the word buildings, is Hackney Marshes. If you look at the historical records, Jake, I'm going to have to put you down, babe, you're really heavy. If you look at the historical records, they talk about, you know, Wesley coming to Hackney and addressing 2,000 people on the marshes. So is a field a faith space? Well, for that day it was, and then it's gone away again. This is why, you know, the boundaries are very blurred and they keep changing. Meeting Field Path, E9, it's a very historic route that is taking you out to that sort of place. And it's an echo in our modern built environment, which takes you back to that use. I've also included another lost building, shouldn't really be there, but just to give you a flavour of it, moving out of private houses and into the Dissenters Meeting House. This is Stoke Newington Dissenters Meeting House, which used to be on Church Street and was, it's obviously long gone, but I wanted to give you a flavour that these are buildings that are outside, these are Dissenters buildings, they're outside of the traditional Church of England history. And Hackney's a great place for those. Right, breeches and periwigs. We're moving on to Georgian and Regency straight away. And one of the most important buildings in the borough on the far left is Newington Green Unitarian Meeting House, first there in 1708. I mentioned I'm an architectural historian, so I'd like you to look at that building, see how it's got a pediment, it's got pilasters, it's got those round-headed windows, it's a symmetrical fronted building. This is classical architecture, so this is saying, yes, the whole idea of a Unitarian meeting house is quite new, but actually this is harking back to the architecture of Greece and Rome. This is setting our new tradition in something historical and giving a sort of legacy and authenticity to what's happening here. If you then look at the Almshouse Chapel at Museum of the Home in the middle, it's the same form, round-headed windows either side of a door, a pediment. This has got long and short work instead of pilasters, but essentially the same thing. And then 2 big Anglican churches built at that time. So already St Thomas in Clapton Terrace is showing us that the parishes are growing, there's more people than can traditionally fit in the small parish churches. They're having to split the parishes up and build new parish churches. And St Thomas, it's got the same details. It's got pilasters, round-headed windows, it's got pediments up at the top. They're used slightly differently, but this is the sort of temple architecture of Greece and Rome. St Leonard's Shoreditch doesn't quite fit into that narrative, but it's there, built in roughly the same time. This is more about sort of Wren's architecture. That steeple is based on St Mary Le Bow. So it's talking about something that's sort of, 60 years earlier than that. Again, 2 lost buildings. I can't help but include them. I've put in 2 blue plaques here. One of them is blue, one of them isn't. But they're both really important. The first synagogue in the borough, we have a huge tradition of the Jewish faith here, which we'll come on to talk about. And the first synagogue was in the gardens of a private house up at Clapton. There's a plaque that marks that location today, 1779. And then Joseph Priestley speaking at the Gravel Pit Meeting House. Now, we have, in terms of our dissenting history, we've got the Unitarian Chapel at Newington Green, we had Ram's Chapel, which is completely gone, and we had the old and new Gravel Pit Chapel. And these are huge and important part of the history, the national story of dissent. And that was happening here. One of the buildings, in fragment, does survive, and it's badly photographed there. It's at sort of Chatham Place, just by Morningside Primary School. And it was the chapel. It survived as a shoe factory. It was Aquascutum for a while, and I think it's some sort of IT company now. The building has been heavily adapted, but it does survive. The blue plaque is missing. I went looking for it to take my own picture, and it's not there anymore. So I'm going to follow that up with my colleagues at English Heritage and see what's gone on there. Great, coming towards the end of this period, 4 buildings here. Again, we're talking about classical architecture when we start, and we're moving towards Gothic architecture. You're right, sweetheart. You will notice that St Peter de Beauvoir of 1840 is just into the beginning of the Victorian period, and this is when the great discussion about classical versus Gothic architecture is really getting underway. Gothic architecture moving from a decorative scheme, that's sort of the wealthy using it as an applied decoration, into more of an organising principle of buildings, and there's really good reason for that. It's a very interesting story, but you can see St John the Baptist in Hoxton of the 1820s. It's still classical. It's got pilasters. There are iconic pilasters there, ionic pilasters. It's got a fantastic spire, but it's still neoclassical building. And then in between, 2 independent chapels. They've got that same language, right? The pediment, they don't have pilasters on. One has round-headed windows, the others doesn't. But it's still speaking about classical architecture, Greece and Rome, and using that to give a story about history, about tying it into history. Right, the Victorian Edwardian period. So hold on to your handbags. There's a lot in this section. If we think that in 1801, Hackney's population was 12,700, by the time Victoria came to the throne, it's about 50,000. So it's sort of tripled nearly. By the end of the century, 1901, it's 380,000. So it's huge growth, spurred by the railways, by technology, by industrial revolution. A massive change, and a lot of refugees coming, the socio-economics of the place change, a lot of people coming in bringing different faith traditions, and these are people who are drawn here. So obviously the traditional Anglican Church is going to respond to that. Dissent is growing and different religions are coming in. What we need our faith spaces to be in the borough is changing hugely. So we'll have a look at some. The first one I illustrate is the chapel at Abney Park, 1840 by William Hoskins. This is Dissenter's Gothic. So if you bear in mind that dissenter really means within Christianity but outside of the Church of England. So that's why this building still has very familiar sort of architectural language of sort of ecclesiastical building. It actually has crosses built into its architecture. And then 2 very different buildings here. St James the Great, this is Clapton. It's red brick. It's using continental architectural references, continental Gothic. It's something quite different. St Barnabas Homerton by Ashpital, it's using Kentish ragstone. We'd call it early English. It's English Gothic architecture. So that building could have been in a village and just standing quietly there for 400 years, whereas St James the Great, we wouldn't have seen anything like that here before. And that's saying, here's a new borough, this is a new residential neighbourhood, and this is a new type of building. We tend to sort of refer to these as red brick and metropolitan buildings. They're sort of celebrating the new whilst linking into the Gothic architecture of 400 years before them. Hampton Chapel, we're still building chapels. This chapel, I mean, it doesn't scream faith. It's got a sort of Venetian, Surly and tripartite window in the middle, round-headed windows again, pilasters and a pediment, but it could be a house, it could be a bank, it could be a school. It's not saying church, and that's a deliberate choice, whereas the other 2 very much saying church, right? One of them is C of E, Holy Trinity Hoxton by William Railton. He's better known for building Nelson's Column, but he also built this lovely little church in Hoxton. And then the Middleton Road Congregational Church. Now, I've cycled past this for years. I did not realise it was 1840s. I thought it was probably 1890s. But there it is. It's actually a very early building. The facade survives. The rest was rebuilt. And it is Gothic, but it's actually breaking all the rules I just set out. It's symmetrical, and it's an interesting one, that one. I'm going to keep going because there are lots of interesting ones. St John of Jerusalem, that parish was there from 1810, so this is the second building that they had. It moved slightly, and it did have a huge stone spire, which was lost and replaced with a very beautiful, the sun's come around, hasn't it? A very beautiful copper spire by Cashmill Day, who's a name we're going to come back to, definitely. St Matthias in South Stoke Newington, with its beautiful saddleback spire, that's by William Butterfield. He is a prolific church architect. His best-known building is probably All Saints Margaret Street, and it will show you incredible interior, polychromy, decorated brickwork, patinated floors. St Matthias was bomb damaged and lost its interior, but it's a very, very striking exterior. That saddleback tower which is sort of above the east end, is actually as wide as the nave, which is an extraordinary way to organise the building. We then have All Saints Haggerston by Hardwick. He's another prolific architect. He designed a Euston Arch, which another lost building, and this funny little church that he built down by the Snake Park, with its little bell cot instead of a tower, and then mighty St Mary's Stoke Newington by the mighty Gilbert Scott. He used Salisbury Cathedral as the sort of basis for a lot of the architectural reference, and again that building didn't get its spire for a long time later. There's a poem about it which I didn't write down. Moving on to, I'm going to be saying that a lot, to the Tin Church in Shrubland Road. This is a really important building. Go for it. Where's my screen team? Head up. We're all going to be creeping slowly as the sun goes. We're going to be moving ourselves. Oh, yeah. Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Nats. Good job. The Tin Church in Shrubland Road. This is on the Heritage at Risk Register. It's a Grade 2 listed building. There were probably 24 of these in Hackney. These churches, which are prefabricated, they come in a kit. They're made of wrinkly tin. You can put it up. And when all of these parishes were created, the first thing they would do is put up a tin church whilst they would then fundraise to have their new building built. And oftentimes the new building, obviously then the tin church isn't needed anymore, but it would go to somebody else. They might use it as a church hall or use it as, it might go to another denomination. But this is the only one that survived. Nearly every single parish in the borough started its life as a tin church, and they've all gone. And across the world, I mean, this was a big colonial effort, was taking these buildings out across the world. There must have been hundreds of thousands of them, no exaggeration. So the fact there's a handful still in London, there's one in the borough, and it's all the more precious for that. This is a real idea of sort of how form, faith following form. Speaking of, this is Muscleworks Gym up in Tyson Road, which was actually built as a Wesleyan chapel in 1851. You can just about still read that, the fleur-de-lis sort of tops on top of there. Mostly it's been knocked about so much that you wouldn't know. And then the Salem Chapel in Bouverie Road. Now that was built for... It's already gone. The particular Baptists, and then it became Presbyterian, and now I think it's run by the Scouts. So this is a building that continually sort of changing and reinventing itself. Okay, a lot of red brick on this page. St Michael's Mark Street. I always want to call it St Mark's Michael Street. That's not what it is. This is by James Brooke. He built 4 massive red brick churches in and around Haggerston and Shoreditch. 3 of them survive. 2 of them still in faith use, 1 still Church of England, I believe. This one became Lascaux's for many years. It used to be architectural salvage inside. It's a decommissioned church. Then the next building is Walford Road. That was not built as a synagogue. It was built, I think, for the Baptists and latterly became a synagogue. So it's continuing its faith use, but a complete change of use at the same time. Also a change of use, the primitive Methodist chapel on Northwold Road. That became a synagogue in 1955, and now I believe it's a theatre. And that's, again, it's sort of saying, this is not a church building. We are rejecting the traditional hierarchical cruciform shape with a high altar and the public in the nave. This is an octagonal building with a great big skylight over the top. So they're confident enough to do that, but they still dress all the windows with little Gothic details. So there's sort of, shall we, dare we? It's an interesting one, that one. I didn't realise its history until I started researching this. And finally, everybody's favourite, St Herringbone the Crocketed, the heavily over-decorated St Mark's Dalston by Chester Cheston Jr. He was not an architect, and the fact that he delivered this building is extraordinary. It's a very elaborate, very confident building with some extraordinary details. Above the transept here, you have these wonderful sort of shooting stained glass skylights that come in and light the very atmospherically gloomy interior. It's a wonderful thing. And he was the surveyor to the Tittenham-Hurst estate, and there's a sort of urban myth about the fact that although he delivered this wonderful and huge and complex building, he didn't connect it to the drains, which I find extraordinary, because if he was the surveyor, you'd think that's where he'd start. Yeah, he was the surveyor to the estate, so laying out all the plot divisions, and you would think drains would fall right into his wheelhouse, but whether that story is true or not, I don't know. It also has, and I don't know if this is true or not, but we are told here, the only external barometer on any church in Europe, but I haven't surveyed all the churches in Europe, so I can't possibly. Yes? Good. Right, more red brick. Here are two more of Brooks's major churches, and you can see there is an architectural sort of similarity between them. Big buildings, lofty and tall, but he's also really good at tucking in lots of small spaces around the outside. So you have vestries and other rooms, which today is a really useful thing to have. Then also the French Hospital Chapel, this little piece on the end there, apsidal-ended chapel for the French hospital. That still exists. It's the Mossbourne School, isn't it? And then the Downs Chapel. This is a really iconic building. If you put into Google Maps London Borough of Hackney, it gives you the maps, and on the side it shows you the facade of this building. So it's sort of representative of our borough. It's an extraordinary and big and confident building in an obscure corner of Hackney Downs. The reason it's there, and it was built there, is that immediately north of that in the railway cutting was supposed to be a station on the line between Hackney Downs and Clapton, and that station was never built. So they were told, yeah, there's going to be a station here, you've got a really prominent site, it's worth loads of money. Built this massive chapel, no station. But it's a good building. Speaking of good buildings, the Round Chapel. This is a really iconic building for the borough. And again, it is saying this is a building of faith. We are leaning into tradition, round-headed windows, pilasters, all that sort of architecture that you would expect. But we're also breaking tradition. This is a horseshoe-shaped building. It's not cruciform. And it's a really early use of cast iron. It's an important one, that one. Less memorable, perhaps, this one. Which is facing onto Victoria Park Road. It's a chapel. What else to say about that? And then these two buildings on Defoe Road, quite well known. And this one says St Mary's Church Rooms in great big letters across the front. It was actually built as an assembly rooms, which before the internet, a lot of people went to public meetings. So it wasn't built in a faith use. It was latterly sold to St Mary's of Stoke Newington, and they used it. And they did have a chapel in it, I checked, because if it's just a sort of mission hall or a meeting space or a Sunday school, it's faith adjacent, and I'm supposed to have excluded it. But it did have a chapel inside. I'm really interested, though, in this building. In none of the descriptions can I find anything that will actually help me pull apart whether these two buildings belong together and were built continuously or not. This one is they're in separate uses. This one's residential conversion. You can see it's derelict when this picture's taken. This one is a children's nursery. I think they look quite different. They look like different builds, different times, different dates. But I couldn't figure it out, so that remains a mystery. And finally, on this page, St Anne Hoxton. It's a lovely little building. It was called the poorest little parish in London, and the parish couldn't afford to put any fittings in it, but fittings came across from another demolished church, I think St Philip's, another nearby church that was latterly demolished. All its interior fittings were taken out and put into St Anne's, and it's sweet. And I think particularly this sort of apsidal 5-part window is kind of triumphant. St Luke's Homerton, again, it's sort of saying this is the tradition of church building. We could easily have been here for 300 years. But then look at these other two buildings. We've got a United Reformed Church in Portland Avenue and fragments of the schoolroom of the Stoke Newington Baptist Church. They could all be part of the same complex. They look very, very similar, and they're coming from quite different uses. This was the Devonshire Square Baptist Church. It moved up from the city, and actually the church itself was on this site. The vicarage is at the top, the schoolroom on that side. It was badly damaged in the war, and eventually the Baptist church moved into the schoolroom and sold off the land that the church itself was built on, which was then redeveloped for flats. So they sort of shifted and downscaled somewhat. That house is down Hassett Road, and it was built as a private house, I think in about 1810. It then became an asylum, and then it became a private house again. Thomas Balance came and lived in it. He sold it in the 1870s, and he sold the garden and laid out Balance Road, the road right next door. He sold it to the Sisters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, who set up an orphanage there. And that was a big site. There's a sort of tower block next to it, which was on the site of their chapel. They did also have a chapel in this building. 50 nuns and 100 orphans living there in the 1870s and 80s. The Clapton New Testament Church of God, 1872, go straight past that, not a lot to say. Ashwin Street Baptist Chapel. Now this is interesting, compared to Morton Glover's Downs Chapel, this is a very odd little building. I'd be curious, I've never been inside it. It's been painted red on the outside, but it must have some curiosity about its layout because its exterior is sort of odd. And then St. John the Theologian in Mare Street by John Drake, that was built for the Catholic Church and is now a Greek Orthodox church. We've had the French hospital. This is the German Hospitals Church over on the far side there, the Hamburg Lutheran Church of 1875 by Habershon and Brock. Very heavily decorated. Lots of crockets and bits and pieces sticking off it, really a sort of church that says, look at me, although its scale is quite diminutive. And then back in Balance Road, the Immaculate Heart. This is built for the Roman Catholics, and it's sort of saying, well, we don't need all of that fancy decoration. Look, we have the great tradition of Roman Catholicism, round arches at the top, much more simple, much more straightforward. St. Scholastica on Kenninghall Road is a really interesting site. It was called the Retreat early on, and it had almshouses and a chapel. The almshouses were designed by Pugin, Augustus Northmore Welby Pugin, who designed the Houses of Parliament's interiors. He gave us a fantastic group of almshouse buildings in Hackney, long gone. However, on the wider site, they also built a schoolroom and a chapel. Now, they have a 1960s church in the front, which will appear later if we make it. But in the meantime, this little building here, this was the schoolroom, this was the chapel, and they still survive as sort of meeting rooms at the back. Holy Trinity Dalston by Ewan Christian. Did we have one Ewan Christian building before, or is that the first? We have two. This is an incredible building on a very small site. Really, he packs it in. He's got this very odd, wide tower, which sits above the choir, which is a really strange place to orientate the whole piece. But he's a prolific church architect and a really interesting chap. This was one of his early buildings, and the whole interior got whitewashed in the 60s. It's the Clown Church, as I'm sure everyone is well aware. Now, this chapel on Kenton Road has given me headaches. Anybody? Anyone? No? Okay. It's going to be finished soon, babe, don't worry. This chapel on Kenton Road is clearly a faith building. I have got so tied up in knots because the roads there change and then the names of the roads change, and I could not figure out who built this or when. One of the kind residents who I got in touch with, his residential conversion, said that they'd done map progression research, and it's not on the 1873, it is on the 1893 map. So I can only give it a 20-year window, and I can't tell you who it was built for. The Riley Memorial Chapel in Church Walk, but more red brick, more metropolitan, very similar looking, but very different to St Michael Fontaine Road by Cuts. That building, its window surrounds are actually precast concrete, one of the very early uses of precast concrete instead of stone there. And then the synagogue. Now, we have the plaque for the first purpose-built synagogue. The first sort of registered synagogue in the borough after that is in a regular house in Alvington Crescent, an 1870s terraced house. A really important, completely lost history. You'd have no idea if you walk down there today. It just looks like it has gone back to being a residential property. But it's got a very important history as the Dalston Synagogue, the Hackney Synagogue, which moved around a little bit, but we'll meet it again. And then finally for this page, the former Orphans Asylum. This was built, I think, in about 1823, and then was sold to the Salvation Army. So it was a huge orphans asylum, absolutely vast. And they converted it into barracks. It was a sort of E shape, and they demolished the middle bit behind the portico and built an enormous place of worship in behind there. Absolutely huge. They were there from 1882 until the 70s, I believe. They sold it to Hackney, who demolished everything except the portico, which then got listed. The school, which is there, sort of took over all the rest of the space behind. And it's interesting to bear in mind, it's been there since the 1820s, before all the streets were laid out. So Linscott Road and the other roads that sort of wrap around it actually come later than the building. They fit around it rather than the other way around. For me, always, whenever you go past the end of Linscott Road and you look down, you think, everything's going to be all right. Anyone else? Yes, Michael Landy, 1999. Okay, St Andrew's Bethune Road by Blomfield, another huge name in architectural history. That building's got incredible interiors, murals all over the inside, well worth getting in if you can, not that easy to do. An odd one, and one I shouldn't immediately have included, I'm sure you all know it, is a fragment of St Bartholomew's down at Dalston Lane. Now, this vast building by John Johnson was built in the 1880s, and this was actually its vicarage, sort of tucked in between the nave and its aisle. The building was war damaged, and they actually used it, the diocese used it, to store all of the church fittings from other buildings that were being worked on or pulled down. A lot of stuff was moved around after the war, so it was full to the brim. It wasn't being used for worship, it was being used to store altar rails and pulpits and screens and all the rest of it. It eventually came down in the 60s, I think, or early 70s, and the vicarage remained, but was still derelict up until the early 80s. The reason I include it, and it's not a building of faith-adjacent use, is because of the granite column here. This is actually a little fragment of the aisle in the nave, so you can actually see what was part of the inside of the church there. Not built for faith use, built as a sorting office on Greenwood Road in the 1880s, but now used by the Holy Temple Church of Christ. And this one was built for faith use, Methodist chapel, which was then later sold to the Roman Catholics. And you can see, it's a terrible picture, they brick up arched windows here and they rebuilt the thing. You can actually read the adaptations that they made to it on the facade. Some mission buildings here, St Paul's Glyn Road in Homerton by H.C. Boys for the Grocers Company, St Mary at Eton, built by Eton College as a philanthropic sort of mission in the East End, with those fantastic extensions by Matthew Lloyd Architects, which won some prizes. They're very, very strident but very well balanced, nice piece of architecture which sort of saved the church really. And in the middle, so I thought, there's no way when we come to do this talk they'll actually put us in St Barnabas. We'll be in the little church rooms at the front, because there's not many of us, right? However, I was wrong. I included this one because I thought we were going to be in it. We're not in it. But it's built by the Merchant Taylors. Riley is ex-student of the Merchant Taylors School. That's why he got the job. They must have had a chapel in there before they built this, because that was built in 1890 and this didn't come till around 20 years later. But we'll come back to that, I promise. And then finally here, the Agapemonites, Hackney's sex and death cult. It's a fantastic building. It's got fabulous stained glass by Crane inside. Well worth going in, well worth looking at all the details on the outside as well. There's a lot of storytelling done through the architecture and the decoration of that building. And it's the Georgian Orthodox Church now, quite a unique thing. Okay, a purpose-built synagogue on this side. So we've gone from Alvington Crescent, the Hackney Synagogue then moved to Mildmay, so actually in Islington, and then they build this building, the architect named Delisa Joseph. This building, you'd be mistaken for thinking it's a shoe factory. It doesn't say... yes, babe. It doesn't say anything architecturally about faith. Okay, yeah. But there it is, a list of buildings still there, 1897. St Olaf's Woodbury Down, again by Ewan Christian, here he is, second time around. This building was funded by the sale of St Olaf Silver Street, I think, in the city. So there was a long tradition by the Victorians of selling off city churches as the population in the inner city declined, using the money to fund churches for the suburbs to bring the word of God to the heathens of the suburbs. And Woodbury Down got this beautiful church by Christian. The Wordsworth Road Baptist Chapel, I think that's a striking little building, I'm sure you're all familiar with it. And now, St Thomas's Square Arch. The list description of this building says it's a gateway. It goes through to a burial ground. But actually, other sources say that it is a fragment of a Presbyterian chapel. And I haven't been able to figure out who's right. I hope the list description's wrong, but it's an interesting question, and I intend to dive further into it. Wilson Street Chapel, 1889. I mean, it's hardly got anything to do with Hackney. It's right the way down on the city fringes. Chumley Hall, though, over here, better known as Berlin Boys Club, that's an interesting one. It belonged to St Mark's Dalston, and their parish straddled the Kingston Road, and they found that they had 300 people on the west side of Kingston Road who weren't coming to church. So they built a mission room and chapel on the other side, and they did it in a sort of almost like Tudor-Beathan kind of style. It's an interesting building, that one. Not an interesting building, the Morley Hall. Unsectarian worship taking place there in 1901, and then it became Welsh Language Chapel. You can't even see it from Cambridge Heath Road. You get a good view of it from the train between Bethnal Green and London Fields. It says the Morley Hall in big stone lettering. Can you leave that where it is, please, babe? Thanks. Thanks so much. And one more on this page, the Trinity Congregational Chapel in Lauriston Road, 1901 by Percy Morley Horder. This, I think, is a great building. This is our first arts and crafts building that we're able to talk about. Lovely, good quality red brick with the little copper spire. It's a very stylish piece. He's probably better known for building the School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in Gower Street. Same architect. Stone Newton Synagogue. Right, so the previous synagogue, we have one in a private house, we have one that looks like a shoe factory, and now on this page we've got three that are actually, proud buildings. They're there saying, this is architectural, this is prominent, this is, giving something. Stoke Newington Synagogue, the first one, by Lewis Solomon over there, which became a mosque in 1981. This little one at the end of Sandringham Road, which has got a beautiful copper sort of octagonal roof on top of it. Neither of those obviously still synagogues. This one's residential conversion, that one's a mosque. This one in Edgerton Road, still a synagogue, 1915. And look at it, it's got a temple-fronted porch, it's got sort of paired columns. This is really a building that's confident enough to say, this is what it is, and here it is. And finally, this one's the one we're in. This is one of the best churches in the borough. This is actually a really exciting building, 1909 to 10, Charles Riley. He didn't build a lot. He was very influential, though, as the head of architecture at the School of Architecture at the University of Liverpool. So he trained a whole generation of architects and got them thinking. A very, very interesting chap. And here, I mean, yeah, we can talk about it, we can see it. It's sort of Byzantine, this is concrete up here, he's using brick, it's almost sort of industrial, very pared back, hardly any decoration. This, as we were saying before, this is a sort of turning point in British architecture, and this is what you could have won. If we'd had the confidence to go with that more sort of Bauhaus kind of vibe, we could have had British modernism that looked like this. It could have gone to a really exciting place. Instead, fell back on more sort of twee, sort of colonial neoclassicism, something more bombastic and a little bit more political. I think you could say he drew interest from both. There's sort of primitive Christian architecture going all the way back through European history to find something before all of that. And actually there's I forget all the words, this beautiful apsided end, and you can walk all the way around the outside. So it's about the forms and the layout, the organisation, and everything else is sort of stripped right back, this beautiful barrel vault. So a very simple but very elegant architecture. And it's a way that British architecture did not go. So we could have had this is a sort of tantalising look at what British architecture could have been if things had been different. Okay. Right, another little group of buildings here. This one, I was really surprised to find this was a faith building. This is the cinema opposite the town hall on Mare Street. It was actually built for the Central Methodist Hall in the 1920s. I had no idea. And also on that page, you've got a primitive Methodist building in Ravensdale Road at the same year that this was built. The hospice, there's a long tradition of St Joseph's Hospice, lots of different buildings come and go, but they still have a chapel from the 1930s, very beautiful. And then the one in between, which is just north of Church Street in Stoke Newington. I haven't written down the name of the road, I can't remember, is it Bouverie Road? In that lovely sort of interwar suburban brick. It could be Grandma's fireplace from her 1930s semi, but actually it is a Catholic church. Yeah. I've included the Stoke Newington Library because it's a place of many meetings and assemblies. The Plymouth Brethren are recorded of meeting there in 1928 to 30. And then St Saviour's Priory at Haggerston, still there, still functioning. A really interesting group of buildings that went up. They'd been on site, I think, since the 1860s, and they really started their building campaign in the 20s, going right through until 1959 with the same architect. There was two architects, but essentially with Gibbons as their lead architect. And there's some beautiful interiors to that space. The chapel, one of the sisters there was a sort of amateur woodcarver, and she decided to do all the misericords, and they're fabulous. She just did them all. She's called Sister Assumption or something. And what a wonderful interior it has, well worth going into if you get the opportunity. Right, we got to the end of that section. Yeah, let's just have a moment to see what Jake needs. Oh dear, here you go. There. Right, faith spaces post-war, and first of all, we have to talk about the Jewish faith in post-war Hackney. So, Jewish faith in Hackney. We have Europe's largest Haredi Jewish community. He has to stay here. It's okay, sweetie. 7 or 8% of the borough 7 or 8% of the population of Hackney identify as Jewish. That's 20 to 30,000 people. 80% of London's Yiddish speakers are here in Hackney. And the community here is served by dozens of synagogues and shuls, temples, kosher shops, services, private faith schools, houses of assembly, house of worship, house of study. Faith observance in this community is differently organised to how we've been talking so far. I mean, you could say that every household has faith space in its kitchen, in its dining room. The whole setup doesn't fit the way that I've approached this conversation so far. I mean, faith being wired into the whole community. Think about the eruv, you know, the sort of string which on a Sabbath defines what's public and private space, so that your faith observance can follow that. It's really like comparing listed buildings to a conservation area. It sort of doesn't work. So I would say that there's 4 wards there, aren't there? Springfield and Casanova and Stamford Hill, Clapton Common. It's entirely different. And for me to try and do a list of buildings here, it's just not going to work. So let's just say that all 4 of those wards are a huge faith space and respectfully treat them in such a way. The building adaptation is interesting, though. There's a lot of big Victorian houses that have been altered, and there's some very specific use. I mean, some of them are just, it's people meeting, it's just a room, it doesn't really matter where you are. But then you think about the mitvahs, and the synagogues and the Torah and the arks, it's a different sort of way of organising, and faith means a different thing and is organised in a different way. So I just draw my eruv line around the entire area, and then we'll talk about the other types of response to different faith buildings in the borough after the war. So the church top right is the big Catholic church that was built at the south end of Mare Street, and below it the Paragon Hall. This is a sort of really utilitarian response to public space. It's in use for faith today, but it's a pretty flimsy looking hall. The building in the middle, the Becker's Estate, as you probably know, on Rectory Road, it was built by Frederick Gibbert, who designed Heathrow Airport, amongst other things. Lots of sort of new housing in Stevenage and places like that. At the Becker's, he provided a chapel, provided a private housing estate with its own chapel for the residents' use. Sorry, not a private housing estate, public housing estate with a chapel for the residents' use. I think it's now a sort of multi-use, like community room. And then finally, Cashmill Day builds St Michael and All Angels on this page. That was a Victorian church on the other side of London Fields. It was badly bombed. Its vicarage is still there. But he provided an entirely new church. And, I mean, compared to New Paragon Hall, which is a matter of, you know, just throw something up and we'll use it, this is an architectural statement. This is quite a fabulous building. Wonderful interior decoration by Hayward. Stained glass. It's giving Basil Spence and Coventry Cathedral. It's well worth going inside if you've never been inside it before. We're back to St Scholastica's in Kenninghall Road. This is built by an architect called John Sterrett, who worked a lot with the Catholic Church. And again, sort of Basil Spence vibes, those sacristies either side, they have stained glass in all the pieces, so they're quite wonderful spaces to be inside. That's 1964. The Seventh-day Adventist Church on Yokeley Road, that's there from 1966, but the Quaker meeting house, they bought the site from the Quakers, and the Quakers have been there since 1810. So this is one of the failings of my presentation, is that actually I'm dealing with it building by building as they stand. That site has been a really important site to the Quaker faith for very, very much longer. There's still a burial ground on site. Their meeting house was demolished, but that's only the second Quaker meeting house of London and the first outside the city of London. So it's a really, really important site. But you would walk past it today, you wouldn't even notice, because there's a very nondescript building sitting on it. The Seventh-day Adventists, again, built a building that looks like Grandma's fireplace. That's down in Haggerston Road. The Wally Foster Community Centre down Marsh Hill. The Salvation Army, they went from that enormous portico to, this funny sort of brown brick building on Lower Clapton Road. Do we need screen team back to tilt the screen? Go for it. And the Jehovah's Witness Kingdom Hall, it is behind Facet Road. It's here, it's been there since the 70s, but the building's been replaced actually. Yes, thank you, Zoe. No.
Oh, sorry.
I'm going to pop you down, sweetheart.
Limiting factor is the length of this cable.
Yes. Okay, we're back on track. Yes, babe. Right, we're nearly at the end, I promise. Methodist churches, we've got 6 of them in the borough. There are architectural stories quite interesting. These ones, 1950s, looking like a church. It's got a tower, it's got a nave, it's got aisles. It's clearly 50s sort of Festival of Britain style, but it's still in quite a traditional way. Similarly, the one up here. These ones are spaces underneath residential development. I mean, it could be a retail unit, it could be anything. So they sort of don't say anything about the church at all. But then the one in Stoke Newington, that was the site of a chapel. There was a big separate building there. They rebuilt that piece. And that is a striking building. That's a building that's saying, look at me. But if you took the cross off it, could it be something else? Yes, it doesn't immediately say this is a building of faith, but it, apart from the giant cross on it. But it does say, I'm a building that's doing something. It's a break in the streetscape. Everything else is sort of terrace. And then it sort of steps back and it does this thing. The United Reformed Church was formed out of the Presbyterians and the Congregationalists. So all of those independent chapels, quite confusing to follow, but it gets easier because they come together as the United Reformed Church. There are 4 buildings in the borough. This one, they had the round chapel and they couldn't really deal with the upkeep. So in the 70s, they were worried about what to do with it. They eventually gave it to the Hackney Building Preservation Trust and moved themselves into the schoolroom. So they're still operating from the schoolrooms in the back. This one, again, it looks like a residential development above with the church underneath. But these 2 are both sort of 70s, 80s, maybe 90s, the Rectory Road one. But they're architectural commissions. This one's got glass bricks forming across. That one, it's a building. They also built this. There was a Scottish Presbyterian church on that site on Manor Road, which was damaged and demolished, and then they built the flats and on the corner the building, and it's quite an architectural piece, that building. I don't think the United Reformed Church have it any longer. I think it's changed hands fairly recently. I know, sweetheart. St Matthew's Church Hall, Upper Clapton, that was a big, substantial 1860s church, which caught fire in 1976, survived the war but burnt down. They decided not to rebuild it, but they kept the hall and sort of adapted it. And actually, you can probably, thanks to Screen Team, just about see here that you've got some sort of mid-Victorian sort of gate posts, and there's other bits and pieces and fragments of that 1860s building that still survive in and around the church hall. This pair of houses on Kenworthy Road is a community of the Word of God. They've been there since 1972. So showing that there's sort of different things happening, and this is a building that you can go to. There's a community of people living there in faith. This is All Souls Clapton Park by an architect called Freddie Toe. Again, doesn't immediately tell you what it is. It could be a community centre, but it's got a great big concrete cross outside, so if you're in any doubt, that's going to set you in the right direction. And finally, St Paul's West Hackney of 1960 by Cashmere Day. His name's already come up. He was an incredibly important post-war church architect. He was working with the diocese. He was working particularly in Hackney. He gave us St Michael and All Angels at London Fields. He also gave us St Paul's at West Hackney, which is a really interesting building, the way that he's sort of reinventing the interiors, although it's fairly traditional on the outside and a sort of L shape. He's inviting the congregation to use it in a different way inside. And if you actually look at its internal logic and layout, it's a super and interesting building, although quite straightforward to build, nothing too complex. Mosques. 82 Forberg Road is the first mosque registered in the borough in a normal residential house, which has gone back to residential use. It was there from 1970 to 78, when they then moved to this site in Casanova Road. And you can see this is a pair of houses. There is a sort of bit that they're linked at the back, but this fabulous dome sort of built over the top, and they've been adapted in a really creative way. Speaking of creative adaptation, this is the Apollo Cinema And it was, I have got the guy's name written down. He not a top-rank cinema design architect, but quite well known. He built quite a few. His name will come back to me probably in about 20 minutes. And actually, all of what you see in the form of the building was built by him for the cinema. It was in a sort of mildly sort of oriental style. So the domes, the arches, the circular window up here, the sort of front and everything was part of the cinema. The mosque didn't really adapt it, they just tiled it. And it sort of carried on in use as a mosque from about, did I write down the date? 86. I think it's actually slightly earlier than that. And then two purpose-built mosques, the one at Clapton and the one down on Kingsland Road. They are not adapted buildings, they're purpose-built, and there were lots of years of fundraising to get them up and running on site. Wells Street Mosque is operating from the former Brunswick Arms pub. It's actually called Hackney Mosque, I think, not Wells Street Mosque. This is not the last version of my presentation, it turns out, so we missed a few things. The Musal al-Noor is in the basement of a former retail building on Stoke Newington Road. This building at Clissold Crescent used to be coal warehouses and stables, converted into a mosque. The date's not there. This is a residential building. Sorry, that was Clissold Crescent, isn't it? This one is Sandringham Road, and this was a light industrial building on Leswin Road that's been mosque since 2010. The Baptist Church given us two new buildings. They've got still the Downs Chapel and one other site in the borough, but they've given us two new commissions. The one on the far left, which is Homerton, I think they call it the Stack, and it's got residential development above, which is paid for it. But really, what the faith space that they're using down here could be a retail unit. It's nothing particularly specialist. However, this building, again by Matthew Lloyd Associates, is architectural. It is saying something slightly different. That's at Frampton Park. This building up in Manor Road is a convent and care home run in a charitable religious way. And then, this is almost bringing us full circle. This is in a residential development. I only noticed it because it appears on Google Maps as the place of Victory Church Hackney and has been there, as I've researched it, since 2018. There are tons of these. If you scroll over Google Maps all around the borough, you will find lots of differently organised groups registered in residential addresses everywhere, all over the borough. And it sort of takes us right the way back to the beginning where, there's people outside of the mainstream who come to Hackney for different reasons, find a welcome here, and they worship in their own ways. And so we're nearly coming full circle. We're nearly at the end, I promise. More of the same here. The Hill Church Anointing Centre in a former stable building up here. Two schools here. The schools can rent out their assembly halls on a Saturday, and the Grace Chapel of All Nations uses the Sixth Form Centre up at Clapton. The Mossbourne, they're used as well. So there's sort of adaptation, movement, that sort of fluidity of use of space, which has been a theme right from the beginning. And then finally, this one here, which is now the St Mary of Zion Ethiopian Orthodox Church. This was built as an extension to the pub next door in 1896. It became the Clapton Cinematograph in 1909, 1910, and is a very, very early cinema in the borough. Then it became the Palace Pavilion nightclub. Yes, well known, famous for stabbings. And then it sat empty from 2006 for a long time, finally bought by the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and converted to a place of worship. We have a Buddhist monastery operating from what was built as a Sunday school down by the River Lee. Next door to it, practically, we're, I believe, soon to have our first Sikh gudwara in the former Shipper Ground pub. On the de Beauvoir estate, we have a Hindu temple. Again, these things are changing. The borough changes continuously. The Dharma Shed on Elrington Road, anyone come across that? Is a Vipassana meditation space. So, could you argue that it's faith? This is another discussion for another time. What is faith today? What does it mean? It was self-built in someone's private garden, and it's an interesting space of people coming together. It builds a community. Maybe it's a modern interpretation of space. Certainly a modern interpretation of space. The multi-faith prayer room at Homerton Hospital. We increasingly see them in places of work, in public buildings. This is a different way of organising faith and space. Faith space now. This is the last slide. Not even joking, because the last one's gone. So I've got Yoga Home, maybe. I have Hackney Downs, Faith in Nature, you could argue. That's the Dalston Superstore. Who am I to say that community is not what faith is all about? Spiritual well-being. We have pagan groups practicing in the borough. You can find them online and go and join the coven. It's all up to you, and that is really the story of faith in Hackney right from the outset. So there should have been a slide there saying thanks very much, giving you my Instagram, the church's Instagram. So thank you very much to St Barnabas for hosting us. Thank you, Nat. Thank you, Zoe. Thank you to Hackney History Festival and to Barney, who is named after the same name as this building, which is pretty special. But thank you very much to you, and thank you to everyone else for coming along. Thank you to Jake. And if...
Finished it there. It was more than a minute, hey, but now they're all clapping for us, you see.
You like that? So thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. Come up and ask me afterwards. If you want to buy my book, it's available from all good bookshops. If you want to commission me to write another one, come and have a word. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you again. Cheers. Well, you don't need to clap again. You don't need to clap again. It's all good. Thank you. Whew. 55 minutes. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, considering having to wrangle this child.